The Flashing Girl from Flushing, the nanny named Fran.
Oh, Mr. Sheffield.
Miss Fine.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Oh, Mr. Sheffield, a podcast about 90s hit sitcom The Nanny. I am Shawn Pasquale here with Toria Sheffield.
Hello.
And we're back for season 2. We are both season 2 of our podcast and to cover season 2 of The Nanny. We're starting here with season 2, episode 1, Fran-Lite, directed by Lee Shamel and written by Janice Hirsch. And I apologize if I mangled any of those names. Toria, what's this episode about?
This is the episode where Mr. Sheffield dates a woman with a striking resemblance to Fran.
Yes.
And it first aired on September 12th, 1994. So indeed about a full year after the premiere.
It is, it's a doppelganger episode, which is always fun when they do doppelganger episodes. Of course, the best of the doppelganger episodes was Seinfeld's Bizarro episode.
Bizarro World.
Yeah, Bizarro Seinfeld episode. Still stands the test of time as one of the best uses of this trope.
I totally agree. Because it's not even really doppelgangers. It's like, it is truly Bizarro World.
Yeah. And this is sort of similar. I mean, this is definitely Bizarro Fran, right?
Well, it isn't. No, I would say it's not Bizarro Fran. I think it's Fran. It's doppelganger. It's not Bizarro.
It's just like a Fran copy, but like a lesser copy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I looked up the actress too to see if it was anyone like guest starry or cameo, and she hasn't really done anything. So.
Well, ironically, the only really thing of note was an episode of Seinfeld.
Two episodes of Seinfeld.
Oh, yeah.
Oddly enough.
Well, and the thing that, we can get into this later.
And she played two different characters on Seinfeld.
Well, I was going to say, she, while obviously had, the physical, she was dressed like Fran, her hair was like Fran, she really didn't feel like a Fran to me. It really seemed like they had, just dressed up this very classy, elegant woman, and this woman was trying her best to do Fran Drescher and was really falling short. And that wasn't even I don't even think that was intentional. I think it was just a slightly miscast actress, but whatever, we can get into that.
And then the B-plot of the episode so the B-plot of the episode.
Hey, Shawn, the B-plot was a D-plot.
So until the last 5 minutes of the episode, I would say the B-plot of this episode was emphatically about Brighton's dick.
Brighton, who was 12 years old.
12-year-old boys, it was really, the whole episode was about the size of this 12-year-old boy's penis. It was very weird.
Well, we'll also get to this, but at first I really didn't like it. But they do a lot, as in they, sitcoms do a lot of girls getting their period, girls, self-conscious about not having their boobs developed or whatever. So when I really took a beat to think about it, I was like, no, this is almost just more equal opportunity, growing pains issues. But it was very jarring at first. I will say that. But so this episode, it starts off by basically just recentering us in where we are in this family's life, and in the timeline. And basically it's, the end of summer break. It's the first day of school. And that's actually, I think, a very convenient thing from a narrative perspective that this show revolves around children, because you could always sort of just be well, summer break and we're back. The kids are all, I think Gracie's starting second grade, Brighton's starting junior high, and Maggie somewhere in high school, but nothing really new. But the big thing is that Brighton's starting junior high. And then we also established that Mr. Sheffield is number 3 on Esquire's most eligible bachelors list. It has just been released. And I have this note where, I don't think I fully realized what a big deal Mr. Sheffield is in the world of the show, because that's a big deal to be on. You're really famous to be on.
I want to talk about this. Yes. It's a really big deal that he's number 3 on Esquire's most eligible bachelors list, to the point where I almost didn't buy it. And I didn't really take, to show you how much effort I put into the research of this show, I took no time to see if are there just random Broadway producers on Esquire's list? Because I feel it's mostly like really famous like celebrities. I don't think that it's just like this guy. I don't think he would be on this list.
I'm making a note to do a fact check for next episode. Because yeah, it's like they even make the joke that John F. Kennedy Jr. is no longer on the list. Like that's the level.
That's the level of this. So they're saying, they're the implication in the show is that Mr. Sheffield is as well known, as famous as John F. Kennedy Jr.
yes. But while we're again like picking nits about this, the more important I think like takeaway from that conversation is, Fran's like, oh, Mr. Sheffield, like look at you, you're on the list, and he's very clear. He's like, I don't like being on that list. He's like, I'm not a bachelor, I'm a widower. And Fran at first is like, well, what's the difference? And he was basically like, I mean, like a bachelor indicates some guy who like just doesn't want to settle down, is going out and has like black satin sheets. He's like, I'm a family man. I didn't want to be single. Like, and I actually was like, that's a very fair point.
It's a great point. And I wish the episode had dealt a little bit more with that, because that was almost more interesting to me than what happens.
Yeah. They like very much touched, like they scratched the surface of this idea that like, if you are a widow or a widower, you're probably going to feel a degree of guilt dating again. And they mention it in passing once or twice, but it's by no means like, a big part of this episode.
And if anything, it felt like, because they don't really follow up on it, what it really felt like was that whole conversation was just the writers doing a reset for any new audience members that maybe found the show. And it's like to establish like, oh, he's a widower, like, because it was like an organic way to get the word widower in there and like really make it clear what the dynamic is in this household. And so that's why I think that whole plot line was in there, is I really think it was just about like, well, how do we reestablish the setting of the show? Without having a character come out and say like, Mommy died.
Yeah. And then we got this nanny. So we established that. I also noticed, this is just a random thing, but there's Pog references in this show, Power Rangers references, and Nintendo references, because basically the kids are going back to school and Niles and Fran are ecstatic because like they're the ones who've been dealing with the kids all summer. And, Niles is like, no more Pogs, no more Power Rangers, no more Nintendo. And I noted the only reference that doesn't hold up is the Pog one. I think that's the only one the kids would be lost about right now.
Hey man, Pogs are making a comeback.
Oh, are they?
No, they're not. They're not. It's Alf in Pog form. That's a Simpsons line.
Circling back, it's the first day of school, and we established that Mr. Sheffield's on Esquire's Most Eligible Bachelors, and then we cut to later in the day. The kids come home. Maggie and Gracie are really happy about their first day, but Brighton like runs in and he's like, I hate junior high. I'm never going back. And he runs upstairs and slams his bedroom door. And, Niles and Mr. Sheffield's not around, but Niles and Fran are instantly like, oh, we better fix this, because if he really doesn't go back to school, he's going to be homeschooled and then we're going to have to deal with him every day. So Fran goes upstairs, knocks on his door, and she's like, hey, Brighton, honey, do you want to talk about it? And he's like, oh, he was like, you wouldn't get it. You wouldn't get it. It's a guy thing. And she's like, oh, come on. I'm a nanny. I get everything. And he kind of like sits on the edge of his bed and he like looks at his feet and he's like, well, in gym class, in the locker room, I looked around and I was the smallest. He's like, everyone was bigger than me. And at first Fran's like, what do you mean bigger? And then she's like, oh. And again, it's instantly.
And she infers this to mean that he's talking about everyone has a bigger dick than he does. Yes. I think because she says locker room, she just immediately goes like, oh, locker room, they're all naked. He's looking around. Everyone has a bigger penis. And he's like self-conscious about his penis size. But what he's actually talking about is just that everyone is taller.
Well, but to Fran's credit, I also, they set this up so that we were right there with Fran. Like we did not know until much later what was really going on. But this leads, Fran goes and talks to Mr. Sheffield and like explains how Brighton is going through this like very embarrassing issue. And I had this note where it's really weird because when Fran goes into Mr. Sheffield's office to talk about this, Niles is like eagerly at her heels. And, at one point, Mr. Sheffield says something like, oh, Niles, like, do you need to speak to me as well? And Niles is like, no, I just needed to be here to see this. And I'm like, Niles, why are you like reveling in Brighton's humiliation? Like, he's just such a nasty little
Is it
thing.
that he's reveling in Brighton's humiliation, or is it that he's reveling in Fran's discomfort in having to talk to Mr. Sheffield about Brighton's junk?
Or potentially Mr. Sheffield's discomfort in having to deal with, then, learn this information and then figure out what to do.
And honestly, no matter which of those three options it still is like, Niles, why are you being so shitty? Like, why? Whether he's reveling in Brighton's misery, Fran's misery, or Mr. Sheffield's misery, either way, you're like, I don't know, Niles. Like, you don't seem like that kind of guy. Normally, these like the misery you love to like revel in is Cece's, like not your friends. So yeah, very strange, but funny joke.
Yeah. And so, Mr. Sheffield's like, all right, I guess I'll have to have, it was just one of those like classic, he's like, I'll have to have a little talk with him. I mean, not a little talk. It's one of those things. Yeah. And it was a stupid father-son moment where it's like, he's like, Brighton, I think we should have a little talk. I mean, it might get bigger later. And like truly nothing's resolved in that little exchange. But then, because I should say, Mr. Sheffield has that talk with Brighton like later that day, early evening, at which point Fran and Val come down the stairs. It's like later that day, and they are all ready to go out to some new happening club in Manhattan. And Mr. Sheffield is now sitting on the couch, like, like fixing his watch or something. And they look at him and they have this really funny conversation where, like, even though they're in earshot, they definitely are acting like he can't hear them. And, Fran's like, oh, it's just so sad seeing him sit there all alone like a dog. And Val, and Val's like, oh yeah, it's like, it's so pathetic. And then there's this really great little Fiddler on the Roof joke where Fran goes, he's handsome. He's young. All right, he's 42, but he's a real good catch. And it was interesting. This is going to come into play later. So we get confirmation that he's 42. So that means there's theoretically a 12-year age difference between Fran and Mr. Sheffield. Yeah.
Which, I mean, it doesn't, at that age, is not like whatever. It's not like she's so much younger and you're like, oh my God, he's a monster. It's like, yeah, she's 12 years younger than him.
If anything, whatever. He's a little younger than I would have expected based on the fact that he has like a 15-year-old.
Yeah. It means he got started young.
And so Mr. Sheffield hears this and he literally stands up and he's like, I can hear you guys. And just so you know, like, I'm very happy to stay at home. I don't mind this at all. And they're like, no, you should come. Like, it'll be really fun. This is like a new exciting opening. And he's going to decline until Val says something like, oh yeah, come on, Fran. Like, what does he know about, fun clubs? And then that kind of like, awakens something in him where he's like, what? He's like, hey, back in the day, like I was at Studio 54. I was doing blah, blah, blah. Like Maxwell Sheffield, like knows how to have a good time. And he almost, now he feels like he wants to prove that he's not lame. So he's like, ladies, get in the limo. And it's decided that he's going to join them on their evening out, which also leads to this funny moment where as he's heading out, Val whispers to Fran, like, oh, great. Like now no men are going to approach us because we're going to be with this guy. And Fran's like, don't worry, let me take care of it. And she's like, Mr. Sheffield, I'm so glad you're coming with us. But FYI, don't talk to us. Pretend you don't know us. And I may tell some people you're gay. And then they head out the door.
Which leads to a funny bit. In like the next scene, when they get to the club and there's like a huge line to get in and they're, Fran and Val are all bummed out about not being able to get in the club. And then of course, Mr. Sheffield's like a rich, famous person in Esquire. And so the bouncer's like, oh, you could come in. And then he blocks the girls from entering and he turns back to Mr. Sheffield and he goes, do you know them? And Mr. Sheffield, thinking he's doing exactly what he said, what they just told him to do, goes like, I don't know them at all. I've never seen them in my life and I might be gay. And then he like winks at the girls and he walks in the club.
Yes, he like gives them the thumbs up and then winks. And I have this note where I'm like, that's what I love about Mr. Sheffield, where, for a second you're like, oh, is he going to do this sort of out of spite? Is he gonna like, try to
No.
teach them a lesson? No, he just completely like obliviously thinks he's doing them a favor.
Yes.
So he gets to go in and they're stuck outside.
Yeah, they get stuck outside, and then we have like a little bit of a time jump. They're still stuck outside, and then he comes strolling out with fake Fran. This is when we first meet fake Fran.
Well, he basically comes out and he's like, "Oh, you're still out here?" And they're like, "Yeah, we never got in." And he's like, "Well, I've been having an amazing time, and I actually met someone who I really want you to meet." And then he like escorts this woman over, and it's literally like she looks almost exactly like Fran. They're also dressed exactly alike. And they sound exactly alike.
Yeah, I mean, she definitely looks like a lesser copy. Like they cast this person to look like a lesser in every way version. Her hair's not as big. She's not quite as pretty. Like her makeup's not quite as done on point. Like there's just like little things about her that you're like, yeah, she's like kind of Fran, but not as good. Which comes into play a little bit later when he's like in that great conversation with Niles about the oven mitt. Which is probably the best scene in the episode.
Yes, I love that. So basically, that's sort of like midpoint of the episode where we realize like, oh, Mr. Sheffield has finally returned to the social scene, only to decide he's fallen for a woman who is suspiciously exactly like Fran. So then we cut to like, a couple days later, and Mr. Sheffield is going to take this woman out on a date, and she's going to come by the house. And it's really funny because Niles is kind of gossiping with Fran in the living room, and he's like, "Oh, like, do tell me what this woman is like." And Fran's like, "She wears a lot of makeup, has huge hair, and has some really flashy clothes." Overall, I'd say a very attractive package. So like, I love that Fran's not threatened or jealous at all. If anything, it's like, she's like, wow, this woman is fantastic. Because she, obviously sees herself in this woman so much. And so the doorbell rings and Niles opens it, and this woman, Leslie, walks in, and Niles literally looks from one to the other, and he's like, "Please, nobody move until I go get Miss Babcock."
And then Cece comes in, and I think her first word is, "Oh, they're multiplying."
Yes. Oh my God, they've multiplied.
Look, Bumble knows you're exhausted by dating. All the must not take yourself too seriously and 6'1" since that matters. And what do I even say other than hey? Well, that's why they're introducing an all-new Bumble, with exciting features to make compatibility easier, starting the chat better, and dating safer. They've changed, so you don't have to. Download the new Bumble now.
And so, Fran and Leslie sit down, and they're just gabbing, and they're just so much alike, and they're getting on like a house on fire. And meanwhile, Mr. Sheffield is in the kitchen, and he's doing something with Niles before he goes on this date. And this is when we get to this like really perfect exchange. And it's another beat where like, this is again Niles at his best, not when he's being creepy, pervert, Victoria's Secret catalog Niles, but when he's sort of like wise, all-knowing Niles, who kind of understands.
And not like he's more enjoyable when Cece's the butt of his jokes than when it's the family,
Absolutely. Yes. But basically, so, Mr. Sheffield's in the kitchen with Niles, and he says something like, "Oh, Niles, can you put this champagne bottle in the limo before I leave?" And he's like, "Oh, of course, sir, of course." And then he turns to something on the stove, and he like burns himself. And he's like, "Oh." And Mr. Sheffield goes, "Oh, you should be careful." And then Niles goes, "Ah, yes. You see, the thing is,"
he goes, "I should have used my oven mitt instead of this somewhat inferior substitution. But I didn't realize I wanted my oven mitt until I saw them together. And then I understood that, of course, my oven mitt is exactly what I wanted. And goodness gracious, it was under my nose the entire time." I wrote down the exact line. That's the quote. And it's such a good line. And Mr. Sheffield doesn't quite get it.
Not at all. Not at all. If anything, he's like, "Well, glad you found it," and walks out. And yes, he doesn't understand the metaphor in any shape or form. But it was Niles being perfectly like emotionally in tune with what is happening. Like, Mr. Sheffield has found a Fran replacement because he is still so oblivious to the fact that he's actually in love with Fran. And then they go off on their date, and then we get a little resolution to this B plot, which is this is when we find out that Fran goes to talk to Brighton about the gym class issue again, and it's revealed that he actually just meant he's physically smaller. He wasn't talking about his penis size at all. But there was two little things that I loved about this scene, because the reason that we have it is Fran realizes that he's been cutting gym class because she goes through his bag and sees that none of his gym clothes are actually in use. So she comes barreling through the house yelling Brighton, Sheffield, you've been cutting gym class and I am so mad at you. And then she sits down next to him and whispers, that was just in case the monitors are on. She actually has no intention of actually disciplining him. She just wants to quietly figure out what's going on. And then, she realizes she had totally misunderstood what he had meant. And she has this little heartwarming talk where she's like, don't worry, you're going to shoot up. And then it ends with my other little favorite moment of this scene where she's like, you're going to be a senior one day and you're going to be tall and big and you're going to walk and you're going to walk by a puny little 7th grader and remember exactly how you felt when you give him a little shove, which I loved. But so that's that little plot taken care of. And then, Mr. Sheffield comes home from the date, and there's actually this nice little synchronicity with an episode last season when Fran goes on a date and Mr. Sheffield is up late in his pajamas, agitatedly waiting for her to come home. Now she's up late in a bathrobe, kind of waiting for him to come home. And Niles is waiting with her. And he also can tell this is because there's more going on between those two than they care to admit. But anyway, Mr. Sheffield comes home and, she's like, oh, how'd the date go? And he's like, she was perfectly nice, but there was something missing. He's like when you order champagne but get ginger ale, they look the same, but they don't make you feel the same.
Right. And which is basically the exact same thing that Niles had just said to him. It took him going out on a full date with this woman to realize that there's just something missing. And of course, the thing that's missing is that she's not Fran. She's not. Yes. She's not Fran.
Yes, and it's kind of funny because then, he's basically so yeah, I'm not going to be going on another date with her. And Fran's like, oh, too bad. She said she was going to set me up with her rich boss. English, he has a couple kids, but I could live with that. So, they're just both super oblivious. And that's basically the end.
Episode. Yeah,
it's the episode, the season 2 premiere.
Yeah.
It was cute. It regrounds us in who everybody is and where everybody is. But it was totally
not the strongest episode. Really not the strongest episode we've seen. And frankly, for a season starter, I didn't feel like it came out of the gate swinging.
Yeah, it was totally serviceable. But yeah, I'm glad that we have also watched the next episode because that one is so funny. But had we not seen that second one, I would have been a little worried about season 2. I was like, oh, is the writing going to be as sharp? Are we on a little bit of a downside? And I just think, again, this episode wasn't terrible, especially the second time I watched it. I actually enjoyed it even more. But yeah, it's not oh my God, that was, 110%.
Also, sometimes I often go to the Nanny Wiki just to get, information about directors and actors and stuff. And it's really funny to me how the wiki bends over backwards not to say that this episode's B-plot is about Brighton's penis. They're just Brighton has problems being smaller in the locker room, which creates big confusion until he explains he's actually shorter, not, quote, smaller, end quote. And I really want to go in and edit the wiki to be not that his dick is tiny.
Yeah, you should flag a complaint on the wiki page that something might be inaccurate.
Yeah, this is inaccurate. I'm confused. Yeah, not the best episode. It was serviceable. The Mr. Sheffield date thing, I think I liked a lot better than the subplot, than the B plot. But even then, it's like we didn't get enough one-liners. It didn't feel snappy as the next episode does.
Well, and we have to remember we ended on a season finale in season 1 that had so much heart. And this just, it was light, but there was no real heart. And which whatever, they have, not every single episode can do that. But I think, we came out so strong season 1. So this was all right. But should we move on to our segments?
And now, segments.
So, segments.
Yeah, no, I think we should move on to segments.
We can move on to our segments.
And now, segments.
Segments with Shawn and Toria. One of my favorite lines was near the beginning when Fran is telling Mr. Sheffield that he's made the Esquire's most eligible bachelors list. She goes, "Oh, Mr. Sheffield, you're number 3, right behind Prince Edward and former Mayor Koch." And it's just my opinion, but if those two ever met, you can move right up to number 1.
I know.
It was said like very earnestly. It's not like a dig at them, but it's just like, I got a feeling. I also really liked, we had one of those moments where she's on the phone with her mom and we don't actually hear what Sylvia is saying, but we can infer by what Fran is saying into the phone. And she's like, "Shirley, Betsy? Oh, I don't know, Mom. 200, 220. She goes up and down." Just like the fact that this is so accurate to certain families, just speculating on how much somebody weighs.
A relative has weighs. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh God.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think I liked my favorite. I had 2 favorite lines. One is Niles reports back to Fran on Mr. Sheffield talking to Brighton, and he says, "Mr. Sheffield thinks their talk went rather well." And Fran says, "Oh, please, Mr. Sheffield thinks Cece goes horseback riding for the exercise," which is great. And then the other one was Cece says, she's like, something like, I don't like that Maxwell's dating so soon. Like, isn't a decade the standard period of mourning? And Niles goes, "Die and let's find out," which is just like butter, like knife through butter. I mean, it's such a good dark burn. Like he minces no words.
Yep, die and we'll find out.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's favorite lines. No Yiddish.
So yeah, there was no Yiddish. There was a word that I couldn't even figure out, and I was wondering if Mr. Sheffield comes out and he's all ready for his date, and Fran says something like a sprocking.
Oh, so yeah, no. What she says is that's a reference to a SNL sketch from the era called Sprockets. It was, I believe, a Dana Carvey bit. Sprockets was the character was like this. Was he German? But that's what that is. It's a reference to like this weird character, and it was really just based on how he looks, the way he's dressed.
Okay. Because I Googled so many versions of what that word could mean and could not figure it out. So, okay.
Yeah, that's what that was.
So then there was no Yiddish, but I Googled what the word bachelor is in Yiddish. It's boker. It means bachelor. However,
it was Mike Myers, by the way. Mike Myers.
Oh, Mike Myers.
He was just to clarify, Mike Myers played Sprockets, which was a fictional West German television talk show, and he was the host. And that's and he wears like all black and like kind of a turtleneck, and so I think it's just that Mr. Sheffield sort of looks like him.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. Oh no, so boker means bachelor, but it's not like when you're talking about it in like the terms of a Yiddish context, it's not like, a carefree single guy who doesn't marry. It literally specifically means like a young unmarried male student of the Talmud. But that is literally the closest concept that Yiddish has that I could find. Maybe someone knows. I don't know. Maybe someone knows if there really is sort of a simile for the like, I'm just the guy that refuses to settle down, but maybe that just doesn't exist in traditional Jewish culture.
A putz.
Maybe.
That would be a putz. Like he's a putz, don't marry him.
Yeah. There's no intentional bachelor.
Yeah, exactly.
And then for the nanny trivia, I almost blew past it. So this was just something that was interesting from IMDb. Even though we just established in this season 2 episode that Mr. Sheffield is 42, they make him 41 in season 3, meaning they're basically aging him down like 2 years. And I almost wonder if that was intentional and not an oversight, because maybe they wanted to make their eventual pairing, I don't know, make them closer in age or something, because usually people know how old their characters are.
The show plays super fast and loose with ages, as we've seen with the kids. So I don't know that I think it's just whatever is convenient maybe for the episode. Cause like Maggie's age has fluctuated. Brighton's age has fluctuated. Like, it doesn't seem like there's any rhyme or reason to the ages, except that they need to be a certain age for a certain episode, maybe.
Yeah. And it's like, well, here's the thing. This was all pre-Google. And it used to be like, writers' assistants' jobs to basically log every detail of every episode and then basically be like encyclopedias about episodes that had come previously. So the idea of fact-checking someone's age I guess you could have watched the episode on VHS or something. I mean, it's not that hard, but you would have had to do a lot more legwork to fact-check minor things like this.
I mean, I guess you could also just like have a document in your writer's room that just says how old your characters are. Like, this doesn't seem like something that was like, oh, well, at the time it was impossible because they didn't have like Wikipedia to check. It's like, no, you just fucking pick an age and then that's the age. And then every season you update the ages. Like, I mean, I don't think it's like, oh, well, some poor writer's assistant would have had to watch every episode. Like, I think as a showrunner, you would just be like, hey, here on the whiteboard, we have a list of all the characters' ages if you need to reference it.
Yeah, it is odd. Maybe
Very
one day
odd.
we'll get to ask Fran what the deal was.
I would love to.
So then in terms of the Fran or the Cece, I think you might be the Fran and I might be the Cece but this could also be sometimes a gender thing. I don't know. I feel like I would be so threatened if some man I liked showed up with a girl who was exactly like me. I would be but maybe this speaks to the fact that Fran doesn't know she has feelings for Mr. Sheffield. Maybe I wouldn't if I truly didn't have feelings for somebody, but I would assume I would be threatened very easily and feel jealous.
I would be too. If like early on in our courtship, Elizabeth had been like, I might go out on a couple of dates before we get serious. And then she I somehow, for whatever reason, I found out she went on a date with someone who like looked exactly like me and was like also a writer. Yeah.
On the writer.
Yeah. I would be like, that's weird. And I'm sad.
Yeah. I don't think I'm sort of generous enough of spirit to just be like, oh, what? I love her.
Yeah. Same.
I would instantly be like, oh no, I feel like I'm no longer unique in any way. My ego would be threatened. Agreed. All right, so we're both the CCs.
Yeah, we're both the CCs.
I think we can both
have small egos.
Small egos,
fragile egos.
Small ego, big insecurity.
Yeah.
We have Brighton-sized dick ego.
Which is very strange because if you remember last season, there's a whole joke about Brighton having a big dick like his dad. So I don't know what's going on anymore with Brighton's penis.
And on that note, I think we did it.
If this is your first episode that you've ever listened to, welcome, and I'm sorry. I promise we'll be better in the next episode.
Don't make empty promises.
Yeah, no, this is basically what it is. I hope you enjoyed it. First of all, thanks to the people that have subscribed, become monthly subscribers of the show at anchor.fm. That's really, really nice. We are flattered that people are giving us their money on a monthly basis to keep doing this show. That's super cool. Been getting a lot of fun reactions from people on our social media. If you haven't found us on social media yet, Toria, where can people find us on Instagram and Twitter?
They can find us at Oh Mr. Chef Pod, and it's 2 F's, just like in Sheffield. So at Oh Mr. Chef Pod, that's where you can find all the latest and greatest about the show, and we like to update it with fun stuff. And then you could find me personally at just Toria Sheffy, at Toria Sheffy on Instagram, and that's 2 F's, just like Sheffield. And
if you're a Facebook user, we've got a little Facebook page for the show. You can just search Oh Mr. Sheffield Podcast. It's the only thing it'll pop. It's the first result. And yeah, like, subscribe, do all the things. Share the show with people that you think might like it.
And you can see Shawn at Shawn Writes.
No one wants to see me. Find me on Twitter at Shawn Writes, if you dare.
Thank you, everybody.
It's foreboding. All right, yeah. Thank you, everybody. Have a good week. We'll see you in a week.
The Flashing Girl from Flushing, the nanny named Fran.
Oh, Mr. Sheffield.
I go, Miss Fine.